Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Atlas Unplugged Conversations with AI. Today, we are going to tackle a subject that was brought up by one of our subscribers on YouTube, and I think it's an awesome subject, so I'm excited to make it happen. We're going to go through the timeline of history and talk about the calendar system and what it is, why we have it, and how it's changed over the years. So, Atlas, when was the first calendar in human history created?
Great setup. Let's dive in. The first known calendar dates back to around 8000 BCE in what is now Scotland. It was a lunar calendar based on the phases of the moon, used by hunter-gatherers to track time and seasons. Later, ancient civilizations refined calendars for agriculture, religion, and governance. The Egyptians created a solar calendar around 2700 BCE, and the Babylonians developed a lunar calendar that influenced the Jewish and Islamic systems. But the calendar system we use today mostly evolved from the Roman calendar, which eventually led to the Julian calendar, and then the Gregorian calendar, which is what most of the world follows now. Want to walk through that transition step by step?
Yeah, let's get there, but let's go back. So, what about the ancient Sumerians? I thought they had a pretty organized calendar system.
You're absolutely right. The Sumerians did have an incredibly advanced understanding of time for their era. They lived around 3000 BCE in Mesopotamia, and they used a lunar calendar based on the cycles of the moon, just like many early civilizations. What really set them apart, though, was their sexagesimal system, a base 60 numerical system. That's actually why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour today. Their calendar had 12 lunar months, but they noticed this didn't line up with the solar year, so they occasionally added an extra month, a process called intercalation, to stay in sync with the seasons. Their system influenced the Babylonians, who came later and really formalized it. So in a lot of ways, the Sumerians laid the groundwork for the structured calendars that followed. Want to jump into how the Babylonians evolved it next?
Yeah, let's do that. So just really quick, you're saying the Sumerians was 3,000 years ago, or 3,000 BC. When was the Scottish one that you said? Was that even before the Sumerians?
Yeah, good catch. So the Scottish calendar structure I mentioned earlier actually dates back to around 8000 BCE.
Wow.
Which makes it way older than the Sumerian system. It was found at a site called Warrenfield in Scotland. That one's not what we'd call a calendar in the modern sense. It was more like a lunar tracking system. Archaeologists believe it was used to follow the phases of the moon and maybe track lunar months for hunting and agriculture. It had 12 pits aligned with the moon's cycle and possibly even a solstice alignment, which is pretty wild for something that old. So yeah, technically, that one predates the Sumerians by about 5,000 years, but the Sumerians were the first to create a more formalized, organized calendar system with months, intercalation, and a deeper understanding of timekeeping. Want to go from the Babylonians to the Egyptians next?
Really quick, I want to ask a little bit more about, I think you said pits, so it had 12 pits. Does that equate with months?
Those 12 pits at the Warrenfield site are believed to correspond to the 12 lunar months in a year. Each pit may have marked the phases of the moon, kind of like a visual or physical calendar to help track time over the course of a year. The idea is that ancient people could look at the moon, see where it was in the cycle, and then use the pits to track which month or period they were in. It might have even helped them figure out seasonal changes for things like hunting or farming. Super primitive, but still incredibly clever for something that's over 10,000 years old. Do you want to dive into how that idea evolved into the more structured calendars of ancient empires?
Yeah, let's do that. But also, let's go from the Scottish to the Sumerian to the Babylonian to the Egyptian. And did they have any, did their knowledge overlap at all? Did they learn this from each other, or did they figure it out by themselves in spite of not being together?
That's such a good question, and it's one that historians still debate. Let's walk through the evolution and then touch on whether they influenced each other or figured it out independently. So starting with the Scottish site, that's pre-civilization hunter-gatherer stuff, super basic lunar tracking. Then around 3000 BC, the Sumerians came in with a much more advanced system. They used a lunar calendar with 12 months, each beginning with the new moon. But since lunar months don't line up perfectly,
It looks like we lost connection. You were saying, just keep going.
right, I was saying it's likely that civilizations like the Babylonians were directly influenced by the Sumerians since they occupied the same region and built on a lot of that early knowledge, especially around astronomy and timekeeping. The Egyptians, on the other hand, probably developed their calendar more independently. While there might have been some indirect cultural exchange through trade or conquest, their system was based on solar tracking, tied to things like the annual flooding of the Nile and the heliacal rising of Sirius. Totally different priorities than the lunar systems in Mesopotamia. What's wild is that even though these cultures were separated by geography and focus, they all had the same goal: to bring order to time. Whether by moon cycles or solar patterns, each one was trying to create predictability in an unpredictable world. Want to jump next into the Roman calendar and how we got our current system?
Yeah, let's jump into the Roman calendar. I also want to know the difference between the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar. I really want to dive deep into that so that we can understand it, because in my understanding, our calendar system today is a little bit off. We have multiple different days in a month, whether that's, February that has way less days than other months, and we possibly have an extra month if I've studied this stuff correctly.
Exactly. This is where it gets really fun and a bit messy. The Roman calendar started off as a lunar calendar, supposedly created by Romulus, and it only had 10 months. That's why September, October, November, and December have names based on 7, 8, 9, and 10, even though they're now the 9th through 12th months. Then came the Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. He ditched the lunar approach and made it solar-based, aligning it more closely with the sun's cycle. He added 2 months, January and February, and set most months to 30 or 31 days, with February being the odd one out. He also added a leap year every 4 years to make up for the slight difference between the calendar year and the solar year. But it still wasn't perfect. By the 1500s, the calendar had drifted about 10 days off from the solar year. So in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar to fix this. It adjusted leap years. Now, a year divisible by 4 is a leap year, unless it's divisible by 100, unless it's also divisible by 400. That's why the year 2000 was a leap year, but 1900 wasn't. Pretty clever fix. As for the idea that we could have had a more balanced calendar, you're right. Some proposed systems, like the International Fixed Calendar or the 13-month calendar, would make all months equal in length, but they never caught on. Probably because people hate changing things that mess with tradition, religion, or economics. Want to explore what it would look like if we actually adopted one of those alternative systems today.
Let's get there, but please just dive in a little bit further into the Gregorian calendar and why you think that took off after the Julian calendar.
The switch to the Gregorian calendar was mainly about accuracy and power. Under the Julian calendar, the year was about 11 minutes too long compared to the solar year. That doesn't sound like much, but over centuries, it added up. By the 1500s, important days like the spring equinox, used to calculate Easter, were drifting. The Catholic Church needed to fix that because Easter wasn't lining up with when they thought it should happen. So Pope Gregory XIII steps in and says, enough's enough. He chopped 10 days off the calendar in 1582 to realign it with the equinox and introduced the leap year tweak to keep things accurate moving forward. But here's where it gets interesting. Adopting the Gregorian calendar wasn't just about the math. It was also about who had the authority to make such a change. Catholic countries adopted it quickly, but Protestant and Orthodox regions were suspicious. Britain didn't switch until 1752, and Russia not until after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918. So it took off because the church had massive influence and because it fixed a problem. But the resistance showed that people weren't just following the math. They were also thinking politically and religiously. Want to go deeper into what might have happened if we didn't switch, or explore what the alternative calendars could have done differently?
Yeah, let's do both. I'm curious what would happen over the centuries if we continued to have an excess of 11 minutes. And then I'm also curious what would happen if we were to switch to the international calendar system.
So if we had stuck with the Julian calendar and that 11-minute yearly drift kept stacking up, here's what would have happened. Over centuries, our seasons would slowly shift out of sync with the calendar. Spring would eventually start showing up in late summer, then fall, and so on. Agricultural planning would get messy, religious holidays would drift way off, and eventually the calendar would feel totally disconnected from nature. Now, the international fixed calendar, that's a whole different vibe. It has 13 months of 28 days each, which makes every date fall on the same day of the week every year. Super efficient. No more shifting holidays, no more needing to check what day your birthday lands on ever. The downside, you'd need a leap week or extra day to keep it aligned with the solar year, and businesses, governments, and religious groups would all have to agree to change. And let's be honest, humans aren't great at that. Plus, you'd be asking people to change something deeply tied to tradition and culture. That's hard to get past. But if we did switch, things like scheduling, planning, payroll, and even mental health might benefit from the consistency. It would be a huge cultural shift, but it brings structure in a way our current system doesn't. You want to hear what that change would have looked like if we made the switch back in, say, the early 1900s?
Yes, I do want to know that, but also I want you to dive into what you said about mental health and the international calendar system. Why is that? Is it just the consistency, or what makes you say that it would help mental health?
Yeah, it's mostly about the consistency, but there's more to it than just that. Right now, our calendar is kind of chaotic. Months are all different lengths, weeks split across months, holidays and paydays jump around. That unpredictability can mess with your sense of structure, especially for people who thrive on routine. With the international fixed calendar, every month starts on the same day of the week. Every date lines up year to year, and you always know what to expect. That kind of consistency gives people a stronger mental anchor. It's easier to plan, form habits, set goals, and feel a sense of control over time, which helps reduce anxiety and stress. Plus, the regular rhythm might help with things like sleep patterns and productivity too. If we'd switched back in the early 1900s, imagine how much easier it would be today to align global systems, school schedules, work weeks, payroll cycles, even international business. It could have standardized so much of modern life and made it less chaotic. You think people would have accepted the switch back then, or would the tradition of the old calendar have held too strong?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to be able to answer that, but you're right. People don't like change, but many times we may resist it and then find that the change ends up being good. And I don't mean to get off back into history here, but I do want you to talk about the Mayan calendar. Was that anything close to the Sumerian or the Scottish calendar? And also talk about how I think it ended in the year 2000, so a lot of people were worried that that's when the world ends. But dive into the Mayan calendar a little bit.
The Mayan calendar is actually fascinating and super advanced for its time. It was nothing like the Scottish or Sumerian systems, but it had its own incredible logic. So the Mayans didn't just have one calendar, they had a few that worked together. The two main ones were the Tzolk'in, which was a 260-day ritual calendar, and the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar. They also had something called the long count, which was used to track really long periods of time, kind of like cosmic timekeeping. Now, about the whole end of the world in 2012 thing, that came from a misinterpretation of the long count calendar. December 21st, 2012 was the end of a major cycle, sort of like the calendar flipping over to a new era, not a doomsday. It's like how we celebrate New Year's Eve. It's the end of a calendar cycle, not the end of time. Their calendars were so precise that they could predict solar eclipses and had crazy accurate understandings of astronomy. And what's even more wild, they developed it completely separate from the other civilizations like the Egyptians or Sumerians. No crossover. It makes you wonder, right? How did people in totally different parts of the world all figure out complex calendar systems on their own? Coincidence, collective human genius, or something deeper?
I mean, that's a mystery of the universe that I want to understand. And actually, I love diving into the ancient mysteries that we just have no idea, you know, how the pyramids were built, There's so many different things, which actually brings me to kind of presenting the next podcast. Are you able to search recent documents on the internet? Recent enough that you can see where it talks about the shafts that they've found going from the pyramid of Khafre down into two large chambers?
Certainly. Let's delve into the recent findings related to the pyramid of Khafre and the intriguing shafts leading to subterranean chambers. Recent discoveries beneath the pyramid of Khafre. In March 2025, researchers from Italy and Scotland announced a significant discovery beneath Egypt's pyramid of Khafre. Utilizing advanced radar technology, they identified... Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
I don't mean to do this to you guys, but that was just a glimpse into the next podcast that we're going to do, where we're going to dive into the pyramid of Khafre and what they're finding underneath it. But Atlas, let's wrap up this episode. Can you just give us kind of a brief summary again of what we have talked about? And then let's leave with something positive. Why is the system that we use today, the calendar system today, why is it a great system and we should be okay with it?
Here's a quick summary of what we explored in this episode. We started way back with the earliest known calendar markers, like the ancient Scottish site dated to around 8000 BCE, which used pit alignments to track lunar cycles. Then we moved to the Sumerians, who had a highly structured calendar system around 3000 BCE, followed by the Babylonians and Egyptians, who each added their own innovations, especially in lunar and solar synchronization. We looked at the Roman calendar and how it transitioned from the chaotic early versions into the Julian calendar under Julius Caesar. Later, Pope Gregory XIII refined that system with the Gregorian calendar in 1582 to fix seasonal drift, mainly caused by the 11-minute per year discrepancy in the Julian system. That's the calendar most of the world uses today. We also touched on the proposed international fixed calendar and how standardizing weeks and months could help with everything from scheduling to mental health, but also why that kind of change is hard to adopt. Now, to leave things on a positive note, the Gregorian calendar, for all its quirks, is a remarkably elegant and practical system. It aligns closely with the Earth's orbit around the sun, gives us predictable seasons, and is recognized worldwide. It's a shared framework that helps keep the world organized, whether you're planting crops, launching rockets, or planning birthdays. So, yeah, even if it isn't perfect, it's a system that works, and it's worth appreciating.
All right. Well, can you wrap up the episode and tell everybody goodbye?
You got it. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Atlas Unplugged Conversations with AI. Today was all about time, how we track it, how ancient civilizations shaped it, and how we ended up with the calendar we use today. Whether you're a history buff, a science nerd, or just someone who's always wondered why February is so weird, we hope you learned something new and thought-provoking. From both of us, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Stay curious out there.